The small town of Willow Creek, nestled among the hills of Oregon, lived its quiet life. The old road wound like a ribbon past white houses with perfectly trimmed lawns and blooming gardens. There were no big stores, noisy streets, or restaurants with bright neon signs. Only a small market, a couple of diners, and a hospital on the outskirts where every patient knew the doctors by name. Willow Creek was a town where secrets hid behind white fences, but never for long. Even a whisper became a loud echo, spreading through the narrow streets. Michael Collins, a 70-year-old widower, lived in a house on the corner of a quiet street. His home was simple but cozy, with a backyard that had become an oasis of roses, lilies, and old apple trees. This was his world, neat, predictable, and, as he thought, safe. Every morning, Michael started his day with a cup of black coffee on the porch, overlooking the garden. The bird song mingled with his thoughts, as if nature wanted to fill the silence he had carried in his soul since losing his wife 10 years ago. Michael preferred solitude. He avoided conversations whenever possible and rarely exchanged more than a few words with his neighbors. Their attempts to engage him in talks about the weather or the latest town events seemed like unnecessary noise to him. He held no grudges. He had simply grown accustomed to his own world, where the past felt closer than the present. But this day was different. Something had changed. When Michael woke up, a slight chill ran down his spine, like a harbinger of something unusual. He couldn't explain the feeling. It was almost imperceptible, like a soft whisper behind his back. But it lingered, even as he walked to the hospital for his monthly checkup. The hospital waiting room was almost empty when Michael entered, enjoying the coolness of the air conditioning after the morning heat. At the reception desk sat Jennifer, a friendly middle-aged woman who knew all the patients by name. But his gaze lingered on someone else, a girl, young with long blonde hair tied in a messy bun and a calm, slightly shy smile. Her nurse's uniform was impeccably clean, and her movements were light, as if she danced even in the most ordinary moments. Her accent, when she spoke to patients, was barely noticeable, but to Michael's attentive ear, it sounded exotic. Sasha, he read on her name tag, an unusual name for this small town. He watched her move, talk to others, and couldn't shake the feeling that she brought a fresh breeze of change. When it was his turn, and Michael entered the doctor's office, his thoughts were elsewhere. He answered the doctor's questions, listened to the advice, but the whole process was mechanical, as if his body acted separately from his mind. As he exited the office, he saw Sasha again. She was standing at the desk, writing something in a journal, her head tilted so that a few strands of hair escaped from her bun. Michael noticed his steps slowing down. "Oh, I'm sorry," she suddenly said when their paths crossed. Her voice was warm, but there was a hint of uncertainty, like someone cautious in a new environment. "It's okay," Michael replied, surprised at his willingness to start a conversation. Usually he avoided such moments. "You're Michael, right?" she asked, nodding at his patient card. Her smile was light but genuine, as if she wanted to say more but held back. "Yes, and you recently started working here?" His words sounded stiff, but Sasha didn't seem to notice. "Yes, I've only been here a couple of weeks." She paused as if considering whether to continue, but then added, "I'm from Russia. I just finished my internship and decided to stay here." This answer piqued Michael's interest. Russia? He had never been there and knew no one from there. He nodded, not knowing what to say, but felt that the conversation could have continued if he had dared to ask another question. But he didn't. Instead, he thanked her and headed for the exit, feeling a slight stir within him, like a gentle breeze in a dense forest. When he returned home, that feeling stayed with him. Sasha, her accent, smile, mannerisms, it all seemed like a mystery to him, like a book whose pages he wanted to open. But why? Michael sat on the porch for a long time, holding a cup of coffee and looking at his garden. Inside him grew a strange feeling, a mixture of interest and anxiety. He didn't know what bothered him, Sasha herself or how she made him feel. The next morning after the hospital visit began as usual. A light, cool breeze rustled the leaves of the apple trees, and the sun lazily broke through the thick clouds. Michael sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. But for the first time in a long while, His thoughts were not about the garden or memories of his wife. They wandered around Sasha, her voice, accent, mannerisms, the barely perceptible tension in her eyes. All this disturbed him, like a mystery demanding a solution. He couldn't explain why the meeting with this young woman had made such a deep impression on him. She was just one of the nurses, and he had seen many. But there was something different about her. Michael felt it with his skin, but couldn't express it in words. Later that day, he went to the local store for groceries. The streets of Willow Creek were, as usual, deserted, with only a couple of passers-by walking along the road, talking animatedly. Michael avoided encounters with neighbors, preferring to bypass conversations about the weather and the latest news. However, while passing the canned goods aisle, he saw her again. Sasha stood at the counter, intently studying the price tags. She was out of her medical uniform, wearing jeans and a light sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her appearance slightly surprised Michael. She seemed even younger than at the hospital. "Oh, Michael." She noticed him first and smiled. Her smile was unexpectedly warm, almost intimate, as if they were old friends. "We meet again." "It seems our town is getting smaller," he replied with a slight smile, though inside he felt something akin to embarrassment. Sasha laughed. Her laughter was soft but genuine, and Michael felt, for the first time in a long while, that he was not so alone. She approached him, and before he could say anything, she spoke. "This town is amazing, so quiet and, how do you say it? Slow. In Russia, where I come from, life is so different, loud, chaotic. But here it seems like everything is asleep." "Not much changes in Willow Creek," Michael agreed, studying her face, trying to understand what lay behind her words. "But it doesn't seem to be what you're used to." "Not quite," she replied with a thoughtful smile. "Sometimes it's even scary. Such silence. It makes you think about things you don't want to think about." Her words struck Michael. Something in her tone, a barely perceptible hint of pain, made him feel that behind that smile lay more than she was willing to show. "But why did you choose this place?" he asked cautiously, hoping not to be too intrusive. Sasha hesitated, her gaze sliding over the shelves, as if she were looking for an answer among the rows of canned soups. "Sometimes life puts us in places where we need to be, not where we want to be." She looked at him, and there was something strange in her eyes, as if she were testing his reaction. When they left the store, Michael offered to walk her home. They walked down the quiet street, discussing trivialities, the local climate, the peculiarities of American cuisine, which Sasha found too sweet. But every time the conversation approached the personal, she quickly changed the subject, as if evading something. "Do you often go to the store alone?" Michael asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Who would keep me company?" she replied, and there was unconcealed bitterness in her voice. "I have no one here." Michael fell silent. He knew loneliness, but it seemed different to him. He had his own silence, familiar and even comfortable. Sasha's loneliness, on the other hand, seemed imposed, like a burden she wanted to shed. "It's never too late to find friends," he noted, though he himself felt how banal it sounded. Sasha laughed, but the laughter was short, as if she had heard not a joke but a sad reminder. "Maybe," she said, and stopped at a turn. "Thanks for walking me home. It was nice." "Glad I could help," Michael replied, feeling that he wanted to say something more, but couldn't find the words. When she disappeared behind her door, Michael stood there for a while. Darkness was falling, and an unusual silence hung in the air. He felt that their conversation held more than it seemed. Something had slipped between the lines, like a shadow he couldn't catch. Returning home, he noticed an envelope in the mailbox without a return address. Inside was a note written on yellowed paper. "Not everything is as simple as it seems. Be careful, Michael." Michael's hand trembled slightly as he reread the note. He looked around, but the street was deserted. Who could have left this? And what was it about? Questions swarmed in his head, but there were no answers. The only thing he felt clearly was that his world, once calm and predictable, was beginning to change. And it seemed that Sasha was an integral part of this change. The next morning, Michael woke up feeling that his life, once quiet and predictable, was beginning to crumble. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, looking at the room that suddenly seemed alien. The last few days had opened a crack in his world, through which something dark and unknown was breaking. The strange note, the conversation with Sasha, her mysterious past, all this wouldn't leave his head. He went out onto the porch, holding a second note received the night before. Beware of those who seem too friendly. They always hide something. These words were like a warning, but instead of clarifying the situation, they only added more fog. Who left these notes? And why did they appear now? After breakfast, Michael decided to go to the park to clear his head. The narrow paths buried in fallen leaves led to the old pond, where it was usually quiet. He thought the walk would help him gather his thoughts. But when he approached the water, he saw a figure standing nearby. It was Sasha. She sat on a bench, gazing thoughtfully at the surface of the pond, as if searching for answers there. Her thin fingers nervously played with the chain around her neck. Michael noticed that she looked more tense than usual. He approached slowly, so as not to startle her. "Sasha, I didn't expect to see you here," he said when he got close enough. She looked up and surprise flashed in her eyes, but it quickly turned into a warm smile. "Michael, this is unexpected." She gestured with her hand, inviting him to sit next to her. Michael sat down, feeling his internal question mark only growing. She was here for a reason. That was clear. "Do you come here often?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Sometimes," Sasha replied, looking at the pond. "It's one of the few places where you can think." Michael felt that there was more behind her words than she was saying. For a few seconds, they sat in silence, listening to the wind rustling the leaves. Finally, he decided to ask the question that had been on his mind for a long time. "Why did you come to Willow Creek? Such a small town, not quite the place for a fresh start." Sasha shuddered slightly. She turned to him, and a hint of wariness appeared in her eyes. "Sometimes small towns are better than big ones. Less people, less noise." She smiled, but the smile seemed forced. "And fewer questions?" Michael couldn't help but be sarcastic. Sasha looked at him intently, as if weighing whether to tell the truth. "Maybe," she finally said. "And maybe I'm just looking for a place where I can be myself." Her answer seemed sincere, but Michael felt she was holding something back. He wanted to ask more, but she suddenly stood up, as if the conversation had gone too far. "I have to go," she said. "Will I see you tonight? I'm still making borscht." "Of course," he replied, not moving from his spot. Sasha left, and Michael remained on the bench. Her words echoed in his head. "A place where I can be myself." What did that mean? And what made her leave so quickly? When Michael returned home, another surprise awaited him. On the doorstep lay a third note, this time folded in half. He carefully picked it up as if expecting it to explode. Unfolding it, he read, "If you dig too deep, you might not get out." His heart beat faster. These notes were becoming increasingly ominous, as if someone wanted to warn him, but also make him freeze in fear. Who was leaving them? And what did they have to do with Sasha? That evening, Michael headed to Sasha's house. As soon as he approached the porch, the door opened and Sasha looked out. This time she looked more relaxed, almost joyful. In her hands, she held a wooden spoon stained with borscht. "You're just in time," she said, smiling. Inside the house, it was cozy, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that behind this coziness lay something disturbing. During dinner, the conversation revolved around trivialities. Recipes, Michael's garden, life in Willow Creek. However, Michael noticed that Sasha constantly changed the subject whenever he started asking about her past. As the evening drew to a close, Michael decided to ask a direct question. "Sasha, I don't want to pry into your life, but it seems like you're hiding something. Why did you suddenly appear in Willow Creek?" Sasha froze. Her gaze, which had been directed at her plate, suddenly lifted to his face. She remained silent for a while, as if considering her response. "You're right, Michael," she finally said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I'm here to escape from something or someone." Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Michael felt his world trembling again. Whatever Sasha was trying to escape from was now perhaps closer than he could imagine. Sasha's words echoed in Michael's head as he walked home that night. Escape from something or someone. This confession was like a thunderclap on a clear day, but Sasha had given no explanations. Her eyes, full of fear and something he couldn't grasp, remained with him more than any words. He sat on the porch for a long time, looking at the moonlight spreading over the garden. The night's silence, which he usually found soothing, now weighed on him. He felt a growing sense of unease, and the feeling that he was involved in something bigger than he could imagine. The next morning, Michael found another note. It lay in the same place, neatly folded and slightly crumpled, as if it had been held in someone's hands for a long time before being left. This time the text was shorter and more threatening. Her problems are now yours. Michael's heart raced. This was no longer a coincidence. Someone was clearly watching him. Someone knew he was spending time with Sasha. But who could it be, and why? Michael decided to act. He went to the library, one of the few places in Willow Creek where one could find quiet and information. He knew he had to find out more about Sasha. He couldn't ask her directly. She would only close up more. So he decided to turn to town rumors and records. The local library, though small, was well organized. Mrs. Andrews, the librarian, greeted him with a slight smile as always. "Michael, looking for something specific?" she asked, noticing his thoughtful gaze. "Not really. Just want to learn more about our town and its inhabitants," he replied, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Andrews pointed him to the newspaper archive. Michael flipped through the pages, searching for mentions of new residents or events related to the hospital. His attention was drawn to a small article with the headline, "New Nurse from Russia Starts Work at Willow Creek Hospital." The article was short and revealed almost nothing, but Sasha's name flashed in the text. Michael was about to close the newspaper when his eye caught a small, almost unnoticeable footnote at the bottom of the page. Sources confirm that the nurse previously worked at a major clinic in Seattle. Seattle. That was hundreds of miles from Willow Creek. Why had she left a big city for a place like their quiet town? Michael decided this was a direction for further investigation. Returning home, Michael remembered an acquaintance at the hospital, Dr. Wilson, with whom he occasionally spoke. They had known each other for several years, and Michael knew that Dr. Wilson could be frank if asked the right way. "Michael, to what do I owe the pleasure of your call?" Dr. Wilson began when they met in the hospital cafeteria. "I need to find out something," Michael started cautiously. "About Sasha, the new nurse." The doctor tensed. He set aside his coffee cup and looked at Michael with bewilderment. "Why are you interested in this?" She seems to have problems. I feel like she's hiding something, and I'm worried about her." Dr. Wilson remained silent for a long time, as if weighing his words. "I don't know much, Michael, but I do know one thing. She left her previous job in Seattle because of some scandal. No one knows the details, but they say it involved a patient. She was involved in something serious, and it could have affected her career." Michael felt his heart sink. A scandal? A patient? What could this mean? He decided not to press the doctor, understanding that he wouldn't get any more information. That night, Michael couldn't fall asleep. His mind was filled with questions. Who was that patient? What was the scandal? And most importantly, what did this mean now, here in Willow Creek? When he finally fell asleep, he had a strange dream. Sasha stood on the threshold of his house, her face pale, her eyes filled with terror. She whispered something, but he couldn't understand the words. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness behind her, a tall man with a stern gaze. He reached out to grab her, but Sasha disappeared, dissolving into the air. Michael woke up in a cold sweat. He thought he heard footsteps outside the window, but when he approached it, the street was empty. The next morning, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to talk to Sasha, despite her reluctance to share the truth. He went to her house but didn't even get to knock when the door suddenly opened. Sasha stood on the threshold, pale and agitated. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. Right now." Her words were like a thunderclap. Michael understood that what she was about to say could change everything. Sasha looked like she was about to faint. Her hands were trembling, her eyes darting like those of someone who had just seen something terrifying. Michael didn't get a chance to ask any questions before she grabbed his hand and pulled him inside, locking the door. Her sudden closeness made his heart race. "What's happening, Sasha?" he asked, feeling the tension filling the room. She said nothing. For a few seconds, Sasha stood silently, breathing heavily. Then her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was firm when she spoke. "I tried to protect you, Michael." She spoke quickly, as if time was running out. "But it seems it's too late. He's here." "Who is he?" Michael felt his inner turmoil turning into fear. "Who is after you?" Sasha looked away, as if her answer itself could bring danger. "His name is Garrett Lane. He was my patient in Seattle." She paused as if gathering her courage. "I saved his life, but it turned out to be the worst decision I ever made." She began to tell her story, and her voice trembled, as if each word was a knife. Garrett Lane, a wealthy and influential man, had been admitted to the clinic where Sasha worked after a serious car accident. He was unconscious, his condition critical. Sasha, the nurse on duty that night, spent hours fighting for his life alongside the doctors. "But when he regained consciousness, everything changed," she continued. "He started thanking me, sending gifts, saying I was the only person he could trust. At first I thought it was just gratitude. But then his attention became strange, obsessive." "Obsessive?" Michael felt his fingers clenching into a fist. "He started appearing at the clinic for no reason. He found my address, sent letters." She nervously licked her lips. "One night, I woke up and found him in my apartment. He was just sitting in the dark watching me." Michael felt goosebumps on his skin. This was more than just strange. It was terrifying. "And you left Seattle because of him?" he asked softly. Sasha nodded. "I complained to the police, but he had connections. The case was just dismissed." Her eyes filled with tears, but she continued. "That's when I realized I had to run. I chose this town because I thought he wouldn't find me here." Michael tried to process what he had heard. Everything in him screamed that this was wrong, that someone should have protected her. But he also understood how helpless she must have felt, and now this man had reappeared. "You said he's here?" Michael finally asked, returning to the beginning of her story. "What do you mean?" Sasha pulled out her phone and handed it to him. On the screen was a message. "I found you, Sasha. We'll see each other soon." Michael felt a heavy weight on his chest. He looked at Sasha again. "Are you sure it's him? Maybe it's just a threat from someone else?" "It's him," she said confidently. "His style, his words. He always wrote like that to make me afraid." She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and pleading. "I didn't want to involve you in this. You're the only person who treats me like a normal person, not a stranger. But now it seems you're in danger too." Michael sighed. He felt his quiet, predictable life turning into chaos. But he also knew he couldn't leave Sasha alone. Her eyes filled with fear, her voice, her story. All of it made him understand that she was in despair, which he couldn't ignore. "Sasha, you're not alone," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out. Together." She silently nodded, but there was gratitude in her gaze. "I want you to stay with me tonight," Michael continued. "It's safer here, and tomorrow we'll decide what to do next." Sasha hesitated but then agreed. That night, sitting in his house with Sasha, Michael felt on the brink. He saw her sitting in the corner of the sofa, hugging her knees as if trying to become invisible. He knew he had to do everything possible to protect her. But who was this Garrett Lane? And how far was he willing to go to get close to Sasha again? These questions kept Michael awake. He knew only one thing. Their quiet life in Willow Creek was over. The shadows of Sasha's past now loomed over him. The night was unusually quiet, as if the town was holding its breath in anticipation. Michael couldn't close his eyes. He sat in his chair by the window, looking out at the deserted street. In his hands was an old revolver, the only weapon he had left from the days when he ran a small hunting shop. He never thought he would hold it again, but now it seemed necessary. In the other room, Sasha slept, curled up on the sofa. She tried to appear strong, but her gaze, filled with terror, gave her away. Deep down, Michael understood that her fear was justified. Garrett Lane was somewhere nearby. He could feel it, like electricity in the air. At dawn, when the first rays of sun began to filter through the curtains, there was a soft knock at the door. It wasn't an ordinary knock, slow, measured, chilling. Sasha jumped up from the sofa, her face pale. Michael stood up, holding the revolver ready. "Stay here," he said, looking at Sasha. "Don't open the door, no matter what." She nodded, her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Michael approached the door and slowly opened it. On the porch stood a man, tall, with an icy gaze and a smirk that was more like a sneer. Garrett Lane. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," he began in a soft voice that held a hidden threat. "Care to talk?" "I don't know who you are or what you want," Michael said firmly, but his hand holding the revolver trembled slightly. "Leave before I call the police." Garrett merely smirked and took a step closer. "We both know I'm not leaving," he said. "Where is Sasha?" "I didn't. She doesn't want to see you. Leave," Michael repeated, not backing down. Garrett's eyes narrowed, his gaze growing even colder. "You see, Mr. Collins, I usually get what I want, and right now I want to talk to her. If you don't step aside, this could end badly, for everyone." Before Michael could respond, the door behind him opened, and Sasha stepped out. Her face was pale, but there was determination in her eyes. "Garrett," she said softly, "leave me alone. You've made my life a living hell. What do you want?" Garrett slowly turned his head toward her, his smirk widening. "Sasha, you know what I want. You. We can leave this place and start over. I forgive you for running away, but it won't happen again." "This isn't love, Garrett," Sasha snapped, her voice trembling, but she stood firm. "This is an obsession. You don't let me breathe." Michael felt his hand grip the revolver tighter. He knew words wouldn't stop this man. "She said everything she needs to," Michael interjected, his voice firm. "Leave now." Garrett laughed, softly, coldly, as if enjoying the situation. "Are you going to protect her, Mr. Collins? Do you think you can stop me?" And then something happened that Michael couldn't have predicted. Garrett reached into his pocket, and the glint of metal confirmed his intentions. Michael didn't hesitate. His hand rose, and the shot shattered the morning silence. Garrett fell, his body helplessly crumpling to the ground. In his hand was a knife, but he never got to use it. Michael stood, breathing heavily, his gaze fixed on the man lying before him. It was the first time in decades that he had used a weapon, and he had never felt so empty. Sasha screamed, rushing back into the house. Michael slowly lowered the revolver, realizing what had just happened. When the police arrived, Michael told them everything as it was. Garrett, his threats, the knife. The police examined the scene and confirmed that Michael had acted in self-defense. However, this brought him no relief. All he felt was a heaviness in his heart. Sasha, sitting in the kitchen, couldn't stop trembling. She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with gratitude but also sadness. "You saved me," she finally said. "I don't know how to thank you." Michael nodded, but his gaze remained empty. "The important thing is that you're safe," he said softly. Since then, several weeks had passed. Sasha left Willow Creek, deciding to start a new life elsewhere. She left Michael a letter thanking him for everything and promising to always remember his kindness. Michael remained alone in his house. He returned to his quiet life, but it no longer seemed so peaceful. Every time he looked at his garden, at the apple trees, at the porch, he remembered Sasha and how she had changed his world. She brought chaos, but she also reminded him that life could be more than just silence and loneliness. The past had left scars, but Michael knew he had made the right choice. And though his life had returned to its old routine, in his heart remained a warmth, the warmth of memories of a woman for whom he had once risked everything.